Hello everybody. Check out all these pantsless men hammering on each other. It's quite the sight to behold on a large scale like this. There's red goo splashing everywhere, limbs flying in every direction, fellas down on their luck, wandering around that will never get to do bicep curls again. Hopefully they've made peace with their god. The problem is, combat hasn't changed since I first implemented it in the prototype, back when the game looked like this. Gross. Anyways, it was always meant to be a placeholder, and for that reason it's quite literally the simplest form of combat possible. Any moron could implement it, even Brian. Hopefully you weren't thinking I wanted it to be like this. Surely you have some faith in my vision by now, right friends? Currently, the game just plays an animation and then does damage to anything within a square in the direction the character is facing. The AI just handles fighting by walking towards a target, then when they're in range, they attack. You strip away all the bells and whistles I've added since I first implemented combat, like the limbs flying off, running away when they're unarmed, knocking characters unconscious with blunt weapons so you can drag them to prison cells, and throwing weapons. You can barely argue you're playing a game. It's essentially just mashing the attack button. Combat, of course, shouldn't feel like a chore. It ought to be exciting, but how can we fix it? It's a tricky thing to get right, but anything would feel better than the combat equivalent of a fishing minigame that we have right now. I decided to focus on combat to take a break from creating art, but as it turns out, before I could refine the combat, I was going to have to make a bunch of art. This is the solo indie game developer's curse. For starters, I always thought it looked cool when people had weapons on their back. I don't think I'm alone in thinking that. Plus, walking around with a sword in your hand when you're pacing around town pretending you've got bills to pay or when operating a storefront doesn't really make much sense. Thus, I had the completely original idea of having a combat mode, letting characters switch between chillin' and killin' by drawing their sword. My original idle animation was a bit too aggro, so I decided to make that the combat idle. Thus, the first step was to create a non-combat idle, with, you guessed it, a sword on the back. Here's those two side by side. The next issue is my original walk animation wasn't aggro enough, so this had to be re-rendered to also have the player's weapon on their back. Gone are the days of medieval concealed carry. Now we always walk around with that f***ing thing on us. If we take a look at some villagers, now that we've implemented those animations, they look a lot more at peace. It's a sight to behold, if you ask me. Of course, we need a way to pull out our strap when things get heated. Imagine you had a long day at work and then some sucker in a gray robe shows up at your tiny house with a magic ring. First thing you're gonna do is reach for your weapon. I added this animation to enter combat mode. If it made a sound, it'd be like swing, and that's how you'd know it was time for gangland violence. Of course, it works with the club too, and that might make a sound like or something. We'll need to do the opposite as well. We're civilized people after all. Oh, I'm sorry, officer. I'll put my enchanted steel killing machine on my back for now. Swing. Nah, just playing. We're cool. Swing. Anyways, now we need to be able to walk with our weapons out. I made this placeholder animation, which isn't very good, but now we can visualize the two states, being in or out of combat. Sword fighting requires a little more finesse than beelining straight towards an enemy with that burner in your hand though. Sometimes you've got to step to the side or even backwards. I made some more animations I'm not exactly proud of, strafing to the side and backstepping. Then, I made it so the player always faces the cursor in combat mode, which I'll eventually extend to enemy mobs in combat as a sort of lock-on, which has the added bonus of illustrating who they're beefing with. Here's what that looks like Texas three-stepping with a weapon in your hand. Like I said, it's not exactly pretty, but it will do for now. As it stands though, whether we can square dance or not, combat doesn't have much impact. The blood takes us part of the way for sure, but we need a little more feedback to make things truly satisfying. I added a short impact animation, which briefly stuns the mob, which looks like this. This will give us another variable to play with later where we can adjust the length of the stun based on the stats relating to the fight. like the target's armor and the attacker's weapon. This will eventually lead to a stamina-limited Dark Souls-style stun lock when we have weapon combos. Finally, with all that art complete, I got a chance to actually write a bit of code. Now we can make it so attacking requires combat mode, and thus enemies will draw their weapons before entering a fight. This already starts to make things feel better. It's obvious now when you're in trouble with the law, with somebody walking up to you to cut your head off, or if someone's just passing by and there's no problem whatsoever. It's pretty important information, I think you'll agree. Now this is far from the last step for perfecting combat, but it's enough to have a significant effect on the feel already. And once we have blocking, combos, dodges, and proper AI support, it's going to feel like a brand new game. But for now, let's just enjoy some gruesome clips I snagged in the newest version. And as usual, thanks for watching and subscribe for more.